Greetings, everyone. Welcome. I am Chris Sumrick, Executive Director of Humanities Nebraska, and very much appreciate that you've enjoyed us for a very special opportunity to engage in a conversation about an important issue in our history and right in the heart of Humanities Nebraska's mission of exploring what connects us and makes us human. Humanities Nebraska is a statewide nonprofit organization and provide grants and programming all across the state. And we are continuing to do as much as we can to reach out through internet means to include more people in our programming these days. Between the weather and the pandemic, it's hard to get together in person. So I'm at Humanities Nebraska's office in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I hope as we have this discussion today and as you chime in on our Facebook page and ask questions, you might share where you're from. This is kind of in the spirit of the Humanities at Home programming that we do on occasion. So this program today is part of a series we call Valuing the Vote. Valuing the Vote is part of actually a national initiative that is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And it's an initiative called Why It Matters: Civic and Electoral Participation. And the Mellon Foundation awarded nearly $2 million to all the state humanities councils to do programming across that initiative's themes. And here in Nebraska, we decided on the theme of valuing the vote and discussing with Nebraskans issues around the right to cast our vote and how that has expanded over the course of our country's history, often through blood, sweat, and tears, and how it continues to require our watchfulness and participation as citizens. This is the first program in a multi-part series focusing on civil and voting rights in the 1960s and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Some of you will recall that we did a series on women's suffrage issues back in November. So now we're picking up where that left off and turning the focus to more the civil rights and voting rights side of things. I am going to now introduce our moderator for this program, somebody who is far more qualified than I am to moderate this discussion today, and that is Mr. Willie Barney. And Willie Barney he joins us today from Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm not sure which of us has more snow and cold today, but I think we're both pretty high up in those categories. Willie joins us from Omaha, and he is the founder and CEO of the Empowerment Network, which was launched in 2006 to unite and transform Omaha into a great city, thriving and prosperous in every zip code and every neighborhood. He's also president of a national consulting firm, WDB Resultants, and co-publisher of Revive Omaha. He and his wife Yolanda own several businesses and facilitate collaborative community building efforts in Omaha and around the United States. Mr. Barney will be in conversation with two really special guests joining us from Alabama, where we know it's far warmer than it is here in Nebraska. And that is Mrs. Joanne Blackmon Bland and Mrs. Lynda Blackmon Lowery, who were born and raised in Selma, Alabama, at the height of the civil rights movement in that state. They have some great stories to share with you, important stories to share with you about their own lives. We are honored to have them join us, and we'll let them tell the rest of their stories. So now, Mr. Barney, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm not sure who is warmer today, Lincoln or Omaha. I trust that our friends in Alabama are much warmer. We are delighted to be a part of this conversation. Thank you, Chris and Humanities, for the invitation. And we are truly honored and delighted to have you both here with us. And I thought it'd be best to allow you some time to share with our guests who you are and how you got involved in the civil rights movement. So maybe I'll start with Mrs. Bland, and you can introduce yourself and let our audience know how you got involved in the civil rights movement and a little bit about yourself. Mrs. Bland?
Hi, I'm Joanne Bland, and I'm from Selma, Alabama, born and raised. I run a company called Journeys for the Soul, and we specialize in educational tours on the civil rights movement with a major focus on Selma. I became involved in the movement early. My earliest memory is going to a mass meeting with my grandmother, Sylvia Johnson. She encouraged us to get our freedom, and she led by example. And also, when my grandmother had to work, and my older sister had to be the babysitter, Lynda Lowery, and she went wherever she became a member of SNCC, so she had to take us with her. And I grew up in movement.
That sometimes having those siblings getting us involved in all kinds of things. That's right.
Yeah, all kinds of trouble, but good trouble.
Good trouble. Oh, I love it. Mrs. Lowery, tell us a little bit about how you got involved.
I became involved following a friend, an older friend named Betty Fights. Betty has this beautiful singing voice, and I just knew if I stayed around Betty, I would be able to sing like an angel, like her. And Betty was one of the older kids involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, where then Dr. Bernard Lafayette was training students in the principles of nonviolence, and they would go and try to integrate the movie theaters or different lunch counters downtown like Crest and Woolsworth, and they said I was too young to go at that time, so I became the gopher. That was my nickname. I would go every time they got arrested. I had to go and find somebody's mother, parent, to let them know that their child was in jail. I heard Dr. King speak at the age of 13 and knew that I was going to be a part of something that I felt even then that I was destined to be, because Dr. King in speech, when I first heard him at 13, gave me the empowerment I needed to fulfill a vow I made when I was 7 years old in 1957, when our mother passed. And the older people said she wouldn't have died if she hadn't been colored. Growing up in a segregated society, I knew that even at 7, that white people didn't like Black people and Black people didn't like white people. But at the age of 7, I discovered that white people hated us so much he would let our mother die, our father's wife die, our grandmother's only living child die. So I vowed when I got big, I was gonna change things, and nobody would ever have to grow up without a mommy again because of the color of her skin. So growing up meant the age of 13 for me, and becoming involved in a movement for change.
That's so powerful, Mrs. Lowery, that personal connection. I don't think I shared with you before that I was born in Mississippi in the Delta area, so lived the first 7 years of my life in that area, and have family in Alabama and Mississippi, all through that region. Before I ask you more about that change that you just talked about, I want to go back for both of you at such a young age to get involved. What was it like? Mrs. Bland, you talked about being in that mass meeting. What was it like to be there in that moment? And then also, Mrs. Lowery, you talked about hearing Dr. King. What was it like at that moment? How did it feel to be there?
Well, I really didn't understand the connection between voting and what we were doing and how it would affect my life. In fact, I didn't really know. They couldn't explain it to me whenever I would ask Lynda, ask my grandmother, why are we fighting for something we already have? Because everybody said we're get our freedom, right? Now, one day we were on Broad Street in front of a drugstore called Carter's Drugstore that's still here today. And Carter's had a lunch counter at that time, and I wanted to sit at the lunch counter, but my grandmother said I couldn't. She said, colored children can't sit at the counter. It didn't stop me from wanting to sit at that counter. Every time I passed by, I'd be peeping in that window. This particular day, my grandmother noticed, and she leaned over my shoulder. She pointed through the window to the counter, and she said, when we get our freedom, you can do that too. I became a freedom fighter that day.
Right.
I understood instantly that the freedom that grandma and her old friends were going for was the good freedom, you know, the one that would let me sit at that counter. And mass meetings were fun to me. The songs, the chants, I liked that. And the gathering of the people, it was just fun. The information, but at 11 and then say starting at 8, as far as I can remember, that it became boring. If they were not singing, I was bored to death. Because preacher after preacher would come up and talk, and they would mostly say the same thing, you know, to get us riled up. You know how Southern preachers are, you have some background in that. And so if he was not a fiery preacher, would get up and say things that would shock people. I didn't like it, the mass meetings, except for the chants and the music.
Thank you, Mrs. Black. Mrs. Lowery, your feeling. You heard from Dr. King himself, and your feeling when you were in those mass meetings.
The first time I heard Dr. King speak at the age of 13, he was talking, of course, about our parents and the older people getting the right to vote and how they would do it nonviolently. He said in that speech, you can get anybody to do anything with steady, loving confrontation. Those 3 words I have lived by since the age of 13. The second time he said it in that speech, I distinctively heard him say, Lynda, you can get anybody to do anything with steady, loving confrontation. And I remember jumping up saying, oh yeah, that's how I'm gonna do it. Because I was thinking about the vow that I had made at the age of 7. And I remember my grandmother pulling me back down in the pew saying, shut up, child, you're in church. But that after hearing Dr. King that day and seeing all these people stand up with him and was ready to make change, I became a freedom fighter, ready to make change.
Mrs. Lowery, I think in reading some of the information, just building on that my understanding is you were one of the youngest, if not the youngest activist that was involved in the march from Selma to Montgomery. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Well, we were marching from Selma to Montgomery to protest the murder of a young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, who had been shot during a night march in Marion, Alabama, he was shot by Alabama state troopers while trying to protect his mother and then 82-year-old grandfather from them beating them. He died on February 26, 1965, here in Selma at the Good Samaritan Hospital. We, the leaders, decided that we would walk from Selma to Montgomery so we could let then Governor George Wallace know that there's still, even though they had murdered this young man, we would still be on the battlefield nonviolently. On March 7th, 1965, which is known as Bloody Sunday across this nation and world, about 500 to 700 marchers were marching, heading to Montgomery, led by then Congressman, the late Congressman John Lewis and the late Hosea Williams.
Yes.
We were heading to Montgomery. We had to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge going out of town to Montgomery. We were faced with rows and rows of Alabama state troopers, and then Dallas County Sheriff Jim Clark, who was the meanest man in Selma, Alabama, his deputies and his posse. We were attacked and beaten. I received, at the age of 14 that day, a total of 35 stitches. I still carry the scar over my right eye and a knot in the back of my head. I was determined that I was going to march from Selma to Montgomery to let then Governor George Wallace know that he could not do that to me, a 14-year-old, and nobody else who was not a threat to anyone. Also, I wanted him to know he had created his worst nightmare, because I was going to grow up and become an educated Black woman and take his job. We had a march on March 9th after that, where Dr. King had asked concerned citizens and clergy to come to Selma in protest of Bloody Sunday. That became known as Turnaround Tuesday, because we faced the same state troopers minus the sheriff and his deputies. On that day, Dr. Ralph Abernathy kneeled, said a prayer, and we turned around and went back to the church, where Dr. King told us he had filed for a federal injunction giving us permission to walk from Selma to Montgomery with protection. That injunction came down positively for us on the 17th of January, 17th of March. On the 18th of March, in the youngest name on the list of 300 that was allowed to walk. And I proudly walked that 54 miles starting on March 21st. I turned 15 on March 22nd. And I completed that 54-mile march.
Mrs. Lowery, that is so absolutely inspiring, encouraging to hear you share your personal experience, as we have all watched different films and studied and read it, but to know that you were there and experienced it is so powerful. I want to come to you, Mrs. Bland, as well. At such a young age, where did the two of you find the courage to stand up? You're standing up to, people that were just so against us and hatred. Where did you find the courage to stand up, Mrs. Bland? How did you all do that?
I don't think it's so much as courage as growing up in the movement. That's pretty much all we knew to do. I thought every child in the world did the same thing I did. I didn't realize until much later that I had anything but a normal life. On Bloody Sunday, I had no idea there was a possibility of violence. They talked about it in the church, I was told later, but being a kid, I was probably outside playing. And when they lined up on the playground of George Washington Carver Homes, I got in the line with my friends, and we started to walk too. As when I crested that bridge, you could see across, I saw those state troopers lined all the way across all 4 lanes. I knew we were not going to Montgomery then when I saw them. And as I descended further, I saw the service roads were filled with policemen, some troopers, some sheriff's deputies and the posse, some on horses, some on cars, which further affirmed we were not going to Montgomery that day. I was too far back in the line to hear or see what was being said. I didn't need to do either, because I had marched so much, I knew the procedure. I knew that when John Lewis and Hosea Williams got to that line of policemen, one of them would ask permission to pass. It would be denied. John and Hosea would go down on their knees and we would follow suit. One of them would say a prayer, and after prayer, they'd stand up and we go back to where we started from, either plan a new strategy or just regroup and come right back. I'm standing there waiting for the front to go down so I too could kneel, when suddenly I heard gunshots and screams. I thought they were killing the people down front. Before we could turn to run, it was too late. They came in from both sides, the front and the back, and they were just beating people. People lay everywhere, not moving, bleeding as if they were dead and you couldn't stop to help them. The gunshots I heard turned out to be the tear gas canisters being shot into the crowd. Tear gas burns your eyes, gets in your lungs, and you can't breathe, you can't see, you panic. If you could outrun those men on foot, you couldn't outrun the ones on horses. The poor horses were afraid. They were rearing and kicking, people were being trampled. The last thing I remember on the bridge that day is seeing this horse and this lady, and I don't know what happened. Did he hit her and she fell, or did the horse just run over her? I do know as I sit here 56 years later, I can still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement. The next thing I knew, I was on the city side of the bridge in the back of a car. My sister Lynda had found me in that car, and I screamed when I saw she was bleeding. She snatched me out of the car and we started running home. Those same policemen followed us. We ran into First Baptist Church, past our house, and in the church they took Lynda away to the hospital. And these policemen, same men, came into the church and started beating people all over again. What happened at that bridge, they stopped at that bridge. It happened in our community all night. It was just horrible. I also participated in the Tuesday March, and I possibly was the only person on the bridge that was happy that Dr. King turned around and went back to the church, because I don't know if I could have, whatever the cost of that freedom was a little too much for me. Well, and when Frank Johnson signed the court order, I knew we were not allowed to walk all the way. Only 300 could walk every step of the way. So I walked the first 10 miles, and after that, I didn't want any more freedom. My feet hurt. Freedom was costly. So they put us on buses and sent us back. And we went over that following Friday to Montgomery, to St. Jude to be exact, and walked the last leg to the Capitol.
Thank you for sharing that, because we see the bridge and I don't think we're taught about what happened throughout the day and that night at the churches and in the neighborhoods and in the community. And I'm struck by what both of you have said is, as we look at history, at one of the most devastating days in our history in our nation on that bridge, but you rose back up. You came back up and you went on and you accomplished it. Maybe we'll touch on that part, and then I want to switch gears a bit and talk about your perspective on where we are now, but anything that you would share with this audience about what that experience was like to be beat down, but then to cross that bridge again and to accomplish the objective and to complete that march. Can you share how it felt at that time?
Well,
I became
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Miss Lynda.
Pardon me? Okay. I became a very angry 14-year-old after I received those 35 stitches. I wanted to go from Selma to Montgomery, and thankful for Mrs. Amelia Boynton and Mrs. Mary for convincing my father and my grandmother to let me go. I was determined that, like I said, George Wallace would see me, and I was determined. I was fueled by the determination that I could change things. Along with all these other people, we could bring change. My thing was still to bring the change of health care for Black mothers, and everybody else had their own, desire of what they wanted to change. I also wanted my parents to be able to vote, because I thought if they were able to vote, they would vote in people like me. And those people like me would know what the struggle had been and would be able to help change the laws that prevented Black people from trying on shoes in a store, clothes in a store, sitting at that lunch counter that my sister wanted to sit in, or drinking out of a fountain that didn't have a label, or being able to live, ride, do whatever they wanted to with their fellow man. So
Yes.
that was why I continued, I think, to
And that's so powerful. I wanted to tie in and remind those that are listening in the audience what a powerful, inspiring messages that we're hearing today, and kind of going through our history, living our history, but also we'll talk about where we go from here. I want to remind those that are listening, if you're on Facebook, that you can ask questions, and we will save some time at the end to be able to pose some of those questions to our special guest here. So if you're on Facebook and you have a question, go ahead and post those out, and we will come back to you. One of the things that you made me think about, both of you, as we were talking about that march, is your thoughts about what you witnessed this past summer, and even maybe what you're witnessing right now in this moment that we're in. One of my college professors used to say, "Where have you been? Where are you now? And where are you going?" So to be a part of such a historic march and other work, what's your thoughts about this past summer with the protests and demonstrations that were going on, and also the current environment that we're in right now? Mrs. Bland, any thoughts about that?
I was so proud to see young people taking up the gauntlet, and because I always felt we got this far, and it's left to them to know where we've been to take us where we need to go. And it's very important that we learn this history and teach this history to our children. Where we've been as a nation has not always been pretty. In fact, in this day and time, this presence that we live in now, and the way that racism sometimes is so blatant, so up in your face. And for years we cried about these same things. We are fighting now for the same things we were fighting for in the 60s. We overcame some. We're just not where we need to be. We've come a long, long way. Make no mistake about it. There were victories, but there are still battles to fight. When we say fight, when people accuse us sometimes just crying out for the sake of crying out, because we gave you this, you can go to college now, you have schools, da 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 da, but there's still so many inequities that we still have to fight. So it made me proud to see them out there. And I encourage them to stay out there until we get what we need. That's what happened in the 60s. We didn't give up until we got the right to vote.
Yes.
It's only that after we got the right to vote, that new obstacles were put in the way, and then the Voting Rights Act was under attack. And we still haven't realized full citizenship. We're still treated as second class and not who we are, living, breathing human beings. I always believe that there's some dehumanization. I know they had to dehumanize people who look like me to enslave them, not just and breed them and take their kids, break up family units. And so that's what you do to animals. We're not animals, we're human beings. And we've been crying about the same thing for years and years. And with the death of George Floyd, I think the world saw that we're not crying about make-believe stuff. We're crying about real issues.
It's real. It's real. And
It's real.
thank you, Mrs. Bland. Mrs. Lowery, what was your view of what you saw, and even where we are now in the context of the civil rights movement? What was your sense of that as you witnessed it this past summer, and even where we are right now?
It still bothers me emotionally, because I can remember the blatant hatred and attacks on a 14-year-old girl and others, where I was kicked and beaten and kicked and beaten until I passed out. So I get very emotional just thinking about it. And I want people to know that, like in the 60s, our fight was mainly about the injustices of segregation and voter registration. Now, the fight, to me, is about putting the word human back into the word humanity, because what affects me, even here in Alabama, will affect you and people all around this nation eventually. And when people can see that blatant hatred,
Mrs. Lowery, I'm not sure if we lost the connection.
I think so.
But you're,
we
go ahead.
look beyond the color
Yes.
of a person's skin and start looking at, as Dr. King says, the character of that person. So I get emotional and when I see things happening and know that much has not changed.
Thank you so much for Mrs. Lowery for sharing that, your heart and what it means to you, what it means to us as African Americans to see these images and know the work that you and so many others have put in to get us to this point where we do have voting rights and that we are able to do to launch businesses and to do things that we've been able to do. So I just want to, on behalf of the Humanities group here in Nebraska and across this world, thank you both for your courage, your faith to continue walking this journey. You didn't just make history, you're still making history. You're still trailblazers, and you're still showing what an educated, passionate, loving people can do, and that we're prayerful that we will be able to show others, and that we have more in common than what separates us. And so we have a few questions that are coming in, and as I mentioned before, you shared some things today that I had not heard about. There's a question that came in: Is this being taught in the schools? Is it being taught in the South, or even in the North, for that matter, to children, so they know the truth about what happened in the midst of the movement? Is it being taught from your perspective? Do you see it being taught in the schools?
We had a battle here in 1995 to get a chapter on Selma in our children's history books. And of course, they do history chronologically. So we started white European history, and by the time you get to the civil rights movement, it's they're either testing or out of school. So a lot of our kids don't get it. And in most places, Black history is an elective. It's not mandatory. It's an elective. You can take it if you want to. And when people are separated from their history, they don't have a foundation to build on. And it's sad. That's one of the reasons I started my company, so that I could address part of that, going to the schools.
Yes.
And all of my guides are people who were there, foot soldiers who experienced this, not someone who was here a couple of days and memorized it and went back and wrote a book. And most academic institutions use it as the Bible for our movement. And that's not it. It's deeper than that. It's much deeper than that. We must tell our stories. I feel I'm compelled to keep doing that. I believe social movements are like jigsaw puzzles. Everyone is a piece. And in order to complete the picture, your piece has to be there. So we encourage our children to learn as much as they can about where we've been, so they'll be empowered. And that's the reason it's not in the school. They don't want to empower you. They want you to think inferior, that you're not good enough. We didn't do anything when we built America. The wealth that you see now that is not in our hands, we did that. We did that. We have a mansion here, one of our museums. And the lady, I went there one day with a group, and this lady said she didn't want to talk about slavery. And she looked at me, the only African American in the room, and said, we wouldn't want to offend anyone. Well, I offended her. I told her she offended me when she brought me from Africa. Everything after that was gravy. Don't you think I would have been proud to tell my child this magnificent building was built by him, by his ancestors?
Yes.
They don't think about that. Where would we get our self-worth from if it had not been for strong people in our past who told us our history, empowered us to be, and to be at the best that we could be? We have to be vigilant, and we have to think that the next civil rights battle should be in education.
So thank you, Mrs. Bland. And I've heard you and your sister talk about health, talk about education now. There was a question, and before we move on, about did either one of you ever receive an apology, any kind of restitution, any kind of recognition formally about what happened to you in that moment?
Oh, that's funny. You wrote that one, Lynda? Just say no.
Lowery.
Just say no.
No,
Wallace apologized. George Wallace
I'm sorry.
apologized.
That was, he did.
He apologized.
But that was funny.
I don't think he knew his name at that time, because he had come to visit us, the National Voting Rights Museum, about 3 days prior to that. And the men that were with him were having a conversation with the editor of our newspaper. And I asked Governor Wallace did he want to go into the museum, and he said yes. So I said, the governor says he wants to go into the museum, but they ignored him. He said, we don't have time. So
Wow.
I leaned down to him and I said, sir, tell them you want to go in the museum. He said, I want to go into the museum. And they pretended they didn't hear him. So I leaned down and I said, sir, say it louder. I want to go in the museum. And they took him in the museum then.
Wow.
But so when he was apologizing, I said, now who told him those words?
Wow.
You know, who told him those words? Didn't know his name when he was here 3 days ago, and suddenly he's so lucid with an apology.
So building on a couple things, there's some more questions coming in, and this is such an engaging conversation. I don't know how we do a part two, but what you're sharing is so critically important. I was honored to have my grandmother and still have my grandmother, and she tells me, and we teach our history, and I tell my son and my daughter based on what I've heard from her and listen, and it's so critically important that we do that. And so one of the questions that came up was, in the midst of what you went through and helped to achieve, and you've been fighting for healthcare and fighting for educational advancement, what keeps you hopeful at this moment? Because one of you said earlier that it seems like we're fighting some of the same battles. What keeps you hopeful that we are going to press forward and achieve these goals? Mrs. Lowery?
Okay. I'm going to paraphrase Common in the song Glory from the movie Selma. In the song, Common says it takes the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young. I paraphrase, it does take the wisdom of the elders. You need to know where you have been to know where you are and to know how to go further. But it takes the wisdom and the knowledge of the young. We don't give our young people a whole lot of credit for their knowledge. And I believe that young people, will move forward, and we change the landscape of a nation, but they would change the narrative of a nation.
Wow.
And that's what keeps me hopeful.
Yes.
That makes me know that everything that we did in that time, during that battle, that nonviolent battle, that we accomplished and left a legacy for our children.
Yes.
I want to briefly talk about the question my sister answered on our history in school, and let you know that in 2015, my book, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, my story of the 1965 voting rights movement in Selma, as told to Elspeth Leacock and Susan Buckley, was published. And it has won numerous awards and honors, but it is taught also in schools. It was recommended to be taught in schools as a teaching instrument on the civil rights movement through the eyes of a 13, 14, 15-year-old child. It starts with me saying, before my 15th birthday, I have been jailed 9 times. And my sister.
All right, Mrs. Lauer, I think we're losing the connection, but you are actually pointing us towards a close. And
I said that
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
because I find it,
Go ahead.
okay. I said that because I find it ironic that my book is being taught all over the world. I even Dubai, Switzerland, Germany, Norway is being taught all over the world. And right here in Selma, Alabama, it took about 3 years before the book was even recognized. And it has also last year was adapted into a musical play. We had to stop performing in March of last year because of COVID. So it education on Black history needs to be taught in every curriculum as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
And one thing people need to hear is that history is American history as well.
Right. Mrs. Lowery, Mrs. Bland, I believe Chris will help us to make sure that everyone that's listening in the audience today and in the future has information to stay connected with you so we can learn more about the book, more about the play, more about the organizations that you are leading and the work that you're doing. We want to make sure that people stay connected. And one of the last pieces that I think people wanted to know more about is the issues that we face today and how we can continue to press forward. But I think you both have shared that information. I see Chris is back with us, I believe. And so we want to, I think we're at 150. Chris, I'm not sure if we have any other time for more questions, but please come back in and join us and let's see where we are.
Thank you, Willie. I think we have time for another question or two, whether that be from you yourself or from the audience. But as an audience member, it's been fantastic to listen in. I'll have some comments in a minute, but I'll stay out of it for a couple more minutes yet if we have more questions.
I think one of the questions that came up is you mentioned John Lewis several times, both of you. How would the local community, there's talk about the Pettus Bridge potentially being named after John Lewis. How would the local community there in Selma like to honor John Lewis and others?
Well, one way we're doing it. I'm heading an organization now to establish a foot soldiers park and naming something in the park after John, if not naming the whole park after John. I disagree with the naming of the Edmund Pettus Bridge because I think what we did in '65 on that bridge changed the whole meaning of that bridge.
Yes.
And we just got through talking about educating our children. I truly believe if we rename that bridge, new history will begin and old history will be forgotten. And this history is too important to the fabric of this nation to be forgotten. And we walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, not the Butterfly Bridge, or even the Bridge to Freedom. And I think it should stay with that name because I always feel when I walk across the street, Edmund Pettus is rolling in his grave because we've accomplished what he set out to stop us. That's a phrase my grandmother used to say about when we do things that people fought hard not to allow us to do. And we've come a long way, but not that far.
So I appreciate what you're sharing, Mrs. Bland, because we're honoring John Lewis in a magnificent way with what you're proposing, but we're keeping that historical context of the bridge and the naming. So anytime, I remember my first time crossing it, I could barely walk across it because it was so powerful after reading about it and watching it and seeing that sign and knowing that I could cross, and all the people that before me had fought to be able to do just something that simple. So it's extremely meaningful. And I want to mention, we have a great friend here, Preston Love Jr., that on an annual basis, they take youth from our city on a civil rights journey in Selma and Montgomery and Atlanta and Memphis. And So I think in the future we'll be doing a program with him, and would love at some point to reconnect with both of you. Maybe one last piece is, again, making sure, I think Chris will help make sure that people get connected with you and your organizations. I am so grateful for this opportunity to get to know both of you virtually today. And I am prayerful and hopeful that we will stay connected. This has been so powerful, so moving, inspiring to me as we continue to do work here in Omaha around education and employment and economic development and improving healthcare. One thing I'll leave you with is this is about voting and the value of voting. You fought for it, you achieved, but it always comes back up that people are still trying to limit and suppress voting. Anything that you would leave us with about the importance of voting and this fight that has to keep going to make sure that we maintain our voting rights. Mrs. Lowery will give you the last word.
I'm going to apologize because my video feed keeps going in and out. So I'm apologize for that first. I often let people know that people actually died for this right. And it is your God-given right. If you do not use that right, then you not only hurt yourself, you hurt your family, your community, and everyone else involved. I could see when they start gutting the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and I could see that voter suppression of the 50s and the 60s. It is up to you to be able to change that one nuance of your life by going to the polls and vote each and every time for each and every election. I also think that the Black Voters Matter has, they have mobilized people around this country, and they did it through grassroots organizing. And that's what we really need to get back to. When someone tells me I registered 75 people, I just look at them because my first thought is, how many of those 75 people will go to the polls?
Yes.
My second thought is, did you educate those people to why they need to vote, how they need to vote, how to determine what candidate they are going to vote for, and educate them to what to expect at the polls. You know, you might register 75 people and 70 of them go to the polls. And then at least half of them find out my name isn't on this list and they have to go somewhere else and be discouraged. You need to educate people when you register them. You don't just put their names on a piece of paper and they get, you know, they're registered voters and don't exercise that right. So if you're a registered voter and you vote, I say thank you. Keep up the good work. And don't forget to let your children, your neighbors, your family know what that means to you when you go and mark that ballot or pull that lever, and what it will mean to them eventually after.
I hear a common theme throughout your whole conversation today is that importance of education and educating even in preparation for voting. I know we're about out of time, but this struck me, and I can't leave without asking you both the question. You saw President Barack Obama elected as the first African-American male, and we just saw the first African-American female and Asian to be voted in as vice president. Any thoughts about that as we get ready to close out and bring Chris back in?
It's about time. No, I'm very, I'm very
That was
proud.
straightforward. That was right there.
Yeah, I know. I didn't really need to add any more to that. Nor do I need a long summary of it. It's about time.
It has been a joy. Go ahead.
I am happy and proud to be a part of history. One for President Obama when he was elected, and now to see a person that looks like me be elected as vice president.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bland, Mrs. Lau. It has been an honor to be a part of this. Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to help facilitate today. Thank you to the audience that has tuned in. Boy, I'm looking forward to part 2 some way, somehow. This has been absolutely riveting for me and facilitating and hearing your story. So thank you so much. Chris, thank you for the honor to be a part of this.
Absolutely. And thank you, Willie, for facilitating this discussion today, and Mrs. Lowery, Mrs. Bland. It has indeed been an honor, and it struck me several times as listening to these stories and your perspectives and your experiences is that, you know, a guy like me goes through life thinking sometimes things are challenging, but really being born into a situation of privilege, where because of the color of my skin and my gender and just everything, you know, I have a leg up in life because of that. And I think guys like me need to keep that in mind as we navigate the world around us. And so I really appreciate your personal stories. And I think I speak for everybody who's been tuned in today and that will watch this in the future, that, you know, here in Nebraska, we're grateful for the time you spent with us today. So thank you. And I'll just close up by just adding that, you know, this is, like I said, this is the first. We're going to do several more of these programs. And next Wednesday on February 17th, we're going to, at 1 o'clock Central again, we're going to do a program on Freedom Summer in the 1964 Convention with Charlie Cobb and Leslie Burrell McLemore from Mississippi. So, and Willie will be rejoining us for that. So that should be really interesting. And then on February 24th, we're going to have Professor Martha S. Jones speak with us, kind of related to the topic of her new book, Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Votes, and Insisted on Equality for All. So that's just a couple more programs coming up. We still have others in the mix. And, you know, really, this is what Humanities Nebraska is about. And our mission is, like I said earlier, exploring what connects us and makes us human. And you've really helped us do this today. We'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for making programs like this possible through their funding, which is administered by the Federation of State Humanities Councils. We're also funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and by the state of Nebraska and the Nebraska Cultural Endowment, and lots of individuals and foundations here in Nebraska with their own private donations. And they're so important, and we appreciate everybody who supports our work in one way or another. So please just stay tuned with us on our website and our social media for more information as these and other programs come out. And we will look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You all stay warm. We'll stay warm, hopefully stay warm, half as warm as you all in Alabama.
I hope so.
God bless. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.